At my engagement party, my parents caused a ruckus. My mom shouted, "Give your $54,000 wedding fund to your sister right now or this engagement is off." When I stood my ground and refused, she slapped me so hard I spun and hit the wall. I looked her in the eyes and said, "You are about to get a surprise you will never forget." And soon my fiancé's dad walked in. My mom froze in shock because he wasn't just a guest. Before I tell you who he really was, drop a comment telling me what is the one line your family crossed that you could never forgive. I'm reading every single one. The sound of the slap didn't just echo off the glass walls of the Harbourview Yacht Club, it shattered the last illusion I had of a family. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that has weight pressing down on your chest. My cheek burned, a sharp throbbing heat that spread to my ear. But strangely my mind was ice cold. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't look at my fiancé Tyler who had started to lunge forward. I held up a hand to stop him. I looked at my mother Stephanie. Her hand was still raised slightly, her chest heaving, waiting for me to break. She expected the daughter who begged for approval. She expected tears. She expected compliance. Instead, she got a stranger. I touched the corner of my mouth, checking for blood. Clean. Then I straightened my dress, smoothing out the invisible wrinkles, taking my time while 300 guests watched, breathless. I realized in that second that the woman standing in front of me wasn't my mother. She was a desperate debtor trying to liquidate an asset, and I was the asset. The contract of mother and daughter had just been voided for non-performance. I stepped closer to her, invading her personal space just enough to make her flinch. My voice wasn't loud, but in that vacuum of silence it carried to the back of the room. I said, "You think that $54,000 is a wedding fund? You think it is just money you can move around to cover your favorite child's mistakes, but you are wrong. That money is 18 years of missed birthdays. It is every tuition payment I made myself. It is the cost of my freedom from you, and you just spent the last of your credit." Stephanie opened her mouth to speak, to yell, to gaslight, but I didn't let her. I turned to my father, Richard, who was standing there looking at his shoes, the silent partner in this bankruptcy of a family. I told him, "Do not contact me. Do not come to my house. The bank is closed." I grabbed my purse from the table. The dignity of walking away isn't about leaving because you are weak. It is about leaving because you are too valuable to be destroyed. I was walking out of that yacht club not as a victim, but as a woman who had just bought her own life back. I started toward the double doors, the click of my heels, the only sound in the room. But just as I reached the exit, the doors swung open. A man walked in. He was wearing a dark suit, looking calm, authoritative, and utterly out of place at a chaotic engagement party. It was Donald, Tyler's father. I stopped. I watched my parents' faces transform, the anger drained out of Stephanie, replaced instantly by a pale, shaking terror. Richard looked like he might vomit. They didn't see a future in-law, they didn't see a guest, they saw the man who held the note on their entire existence. Donald didn't look at me. He looked straight at them and he didn't smile. I walked past him into the cool night air, leaving them trapped in the room with their nightmare. That $54,000 didn't just appear in my account, it had a ghost attached to it. My grandmother Alina was the only person in our family who saw the rot at the center of the Harper house. 3 years ago on her deathbed she pressed a check into my hand. Her grip was weak but her eyes were sharp. She whispered, "Hide this, do not tell your mother, do not tell your father. If they know you have it, they will find a reason to take it." She was right, that money wasn't a gift. It was an escape. Grandma Alina had given the exact same amount to my sister Sierra a week earlier. She wanted to be fair, but fairness in my family is a myth. I took my share and put it into a high-yield savings account. I lived in a studio apartment the size of a shoebox. I drove a 10-year-old car. I brown-bagged my lunch every single day. I treated that money like it was the only thing standing between me and drowning. I watched it grow, interest penny by interest penny. Quietly building a wall of security around my life, Sierra took a different approach. She took her $54,000 and decided she was going to be a lifestyle influencer. She didn't invest in a home or an education, she invested in optics. She rented a luxury loft she couldn't afford. She flew to Tulum and Bali for photo shoots. She bought designer bags to unbox on camera for an audience that never really existed. In 6 months, Sierra had burned through every single cent. And when the money ran out, she didn't get a job. She went to our parents, and instead of telling her to grow up, Stephanie and Richard opened their veins. They paid her rent. They paid her credit card bills. They called it supporting her dreams. I called it subsidizing her delusion. For years, I watched my parents pour their own retirement savings into the black hole of Sierra's life. They leveraged their business. They cut corners. They started looking tired, desperate, and hollow. They didn't hate me because I was bad. They resented me because I was solvent. My stability was an insult to their Chaos, the demand at the engagement party wasn't about a wedding. Sierra didn't need a wedding fund, she needed a bailout. My parents had finally run dry. They had tapped every line of credit, maxed every card, and now they were staring at the one person in the family who had actually followed the rules. They didn't see a daughter, they saw a liquidity event. I realized as I drove away from the yacht club that I wasn't just protecting my savings, I was honoring a dying woman's wish. Giving. That money to Sierra wouldn't have saved her. It would have just bought her another 6 months of pretending to be someone she wasn't. And I was done paying for tickets to a show I never wanted to see. The silence of the car ride home was broken only by the relentless vibration of my phone. It wasn't a few messages, it was a digital siege. My mother, my father, Sierra, aunts I hadn't spoken to in a decade, they were all firing at once. I handed the phone to Tyler. "Read them," I said. "I need to know the blast radius." Tyler scrolled, his face hardening with every swipe. "Your mom says you humiliated them in front of their investor. She says Donald is going to pull his funding because of your scene. She says you need to transfer the money by morning to show good faith." I almost laughed. Good faith. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They were doubling down. They were rewriting reality in real time. In their version, I wasn't the victim of extortion. I was the unstable daughter who sabotaged a delicate business deal. Then came Sierra's move. Tyler opened a link sent by a cousin. It was a TikTok video posted 20 minutes ago. Sierra sat in her car, ring light reflecting in her tear-filled eyes, soft piano music playing in the background. "She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. It's just hard," she whispered to her camera. "When you realize some family members would rather watch you starve than help you. They hoard their wealth while you drown. I guess blood isn't thicker than a bank balance." Comments were already rolling in. "Stay strong, Queen, cut them off, you deserve better." I watched it, feeling a strange detachment. For years I had asked myself why. Why did they protect her? Why did they let her fail upwards while I was punished for succeeding? Looking at Sierra's performance, the answer finally clicked. It wasn't love, it was the sunk cost of toxic loyalty. My parents had spent 26 years investing every emotional and financial dollar they had into the idea that Sierra was special. She was their lottery ticket. She was the proof that they were exceptional parents who raised an exceptional child. To admit now that she was a failure, that she was lazy, entitled, and a financial black hole would be to admit that they had wasted their lives. They couldn't fold the hand, they were too deep in the pot, so instead of cutting their losses, they kept throwing good money after bad, hoping that one day the universe would validate their delusion. And I was the only threat to that delusion by refusing to pay. I wasn't just being stingy, I was forcing them to look at the ledger. I was the audit. They couldn't survive. I took the phone back from Tyler and turned it off. They weren't fighting for Sierra, they were fighting for their own egos, and they were willing to burn me to the ground to keep them warm. I looked at Tyler. "They aren't going to stop." I said. "They can't stop. If they stop, they have to admit they created a monster." Tyler nodded, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "Then we don't let them in," he said. "We change the locks, we change the numbers, we go to war." But I knew a text war wouldn't end this. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. I needed to know why Donald, a man who dealt in millions, was personally attending the engagement party of a family that was clearly drowning. "Take me to your dad," I said. I didn't block their numbers, I muted them. Blocking is emotional, muting is strategic. I needed a record of their escalation, a time-stamped log of their unraveling, while my phone buzzed uselessly on the coffee table. I opened my laptop. I wasn't going to fight them in a text thread. I was going to fight them with paperwork. I pulled up the trust documents from my grandmother's estate. I had scanned them years ago, paranoid that the physical copies would disappear. I read every line, every clause, looking for a loophole they might try to exploit. The money was mine, irrevocable, untouchable. But then I started looking at the other files, the ones I had access to because I had once helped my father set up his digital filing system. I logged into the family cloud account. They had never changed the password. It was sloppy, arrogant, typical. I started going through the folders labeled business expansion and loans. I wasn't looking for wedding plans. I was looking for the truth about their panic. What I found made my stomach turn. It wasn't just bad business. It was a comprehensive history of financial bleeding. There were loans taken out to pay other loans, credit cards maxed out to cover payroll, and then I saw the timeline. Every major dip in their business revenue coincided perfectly with one of Sierra's crises. February 2021, a $12,000 withdrawal labeled equipment repair. That was the month Sierra crashed her car and needed a new one. August 2022, a $15,000 loan from a high-interest lender. That was the month Sierra moved into the loft she couldn't afford. They had been cannibalizing their own livelihood to keep her afloat. But the Most damning document was recent. It was a folder labeled Donald V. Investment. I opened it. It contained emails, term sheets, and a repayment schedule that was already 3 months overdue. My parents hadn't just invited Donald to the party because he was the groom's father. They had invited him because they were trying to soften him up. They were trying to use the social pressure of a wedding to buy time on a debt they couldn't pay. And the $54,000 that wasn't for a wedding. That was the interest payment they needed to keep Donald from foreclosing on their business. I closed the laptop. The pieces fit together with a sickening click. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a line item on a balance sheet. I was the emergency fund they felt entitled to access because they had birthed me. I picked up my phone and called Tyler. "I need to see your dad," I said. "Not tomorrow. Now, is everything okay?" Tyler asked, his voice tight with worry. "No," I said, "but it's about to be clear. I know why he was at the party. And I need him to know that I know." I drove to Donald's office. It was late, but I knew he'd be there. Men like Donald didn't stop working just because the sun went down. I walked in not as the girl who had been slapped, but as the woman who had done the math. I needed him to see me not as a liability, but as a whistleblower. I was about to burn my family's house down, but I needed to make sure I wasn't standing inside when it collapsed. Donald's office was quiet. The kind of quiet that costs money. He was sitting behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of mahogany, reviewing a stack of documents. He looked up when Tyler and I walked in, his expression shifting from professional detachment to mild surprise. "Isabella," he said, setting down his pen, "I didn't expect to see you until the wedding, or what's left of it." "There isn't going to be a wedding," I said, sitting down opposite him without waiting for an invitation. "Not the one they planned anyway, but that's not why I'm here." I pulled my laptop out of my bag and opened it. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I slid the computer across the desk, the screen displaying the loan application I had found in my parents' files. "I found this," I said. "It's the application my parents submitted to your firm 6 months ago for the bridge loan." Donald glanced at the screen, then back at me. "I'm aware of the loan, Isabella. It's currently in default. That's why I was at the party. Your father promised me a significant payment to bring it current." "Look at the collateral section," I said. Donald frowned, leaning forward. He adjusted his glasses and read the line I had highlighted. His eyes stopped moving. He read it again. Then he looked up at me, and for the first time I saw genuine shock on his face. "They listed a trust fund," he said slowly. "Liquid assets, daughter's trust fund, $54,000. Access guaranteed. I never authorized that," I said. "I didn't even know they knew about the money until tonight. That money is in a private account under my name. They don't have access. They never did." Donald sat back in his chair, exhaling a long breath. "They told me it was a family asset. They said you were a silent partner in the business and that the funds were available for liquidity. They lied. I said they committed fraud. They used my savings money my grandmother left me to escape them to secure a loan they knew they couldn't pay back without stealing from me." Room went silent. The implications hung in the air like smoke. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It wasn't about a slap or a wedding fund. My parents had falsified financial documents to a federal lender. They had committed bank fraud. And by slapping me when I refused to hand over the money, my mother hadn't just lost her temper. She had been trying to beat the money out of me to cover a crime. "I'm sorry," Donald said, his voice quiet. "I had no idea." "I know," I said, "but now you do, and I need to know what happens next, because if they think they can intimidate me into covering this, they're wrong. I will go to the police if I have to." Donald stood up. He walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "You won't have to go to the police, Isabella," he said, "because I'm going to handle this. They didn't just defraud me. They used my son's fiancée as a shield for their incompetence. That ends tonight." He turned back to me, his face hard. "I'm calling the loan immediately, and I'm filing a report regarding the fraudulent collateral. They are going to lose the business. They are going to lose the house, and they are going to answer for this." I felt a wave of nausea followed by a rush of relief. It was over. The secret was out. The weapon they had been holding to my head had just been dismantled. "Thank you, don't thank me," Donald said. "You saved yourself. I'm just closing the book." As we left the office, Tyler took my hand. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," I said, "but I think I'm finally free, but freedom has a price." And as we drove back to my apartment, I knew the bill was about to come due. My parents were cornered animals now. They had lost their leverage, their reputation, and soon their assets. And when a narcissist loses everything, they don't go quietly. They explode. The banging on my door didn't sound like a knock. It sounded like a raid. It was barely an hour after we'd left Donald's office. But bad news travels at the speed of light in the financial world. My parents hadn't just received a polite email. They had likely received a foreclosure notice or an immediate demand for repayment. They were cornered animals, and my apartment was the only exit they had left. Tyler moved to stand in front of me, but I stepped around him. I unlocked the deadbolt and threw the door open. I wasn't going to hide behind it. Stephanie and Richard stood in the hallway. They looked deranged. My mother's hair was wild, her makeup smeared. The mask of the perfect society. Matron completely melted away. My father was shaking, his face a map of panic and rage. "You fix this," Stephanie screamed, pushing past me into the living room without an invitation. "You call him right now. You tell him it was a mistake. You tell him you authorized it." "I didn't authorize anything," I said, my voice steady against her hysteria, "and I'm not fixing your fraud." "Fraud," Richard choked out the word. "We were protecting the family. We were protecting you. Do you have any idea what happens if we lose the business? Sierra will be on the street. We will be destitute. That sounds like a consequence." I said, "Not my problem. That was the trigger. In psychology, it's called an extinction burst. When a manipulator realizes their control is permanently severed, when the buttons they usually push stop working, they don't retreat. They explode. They ramp up the behavior to a terrifying, irrational peak, trying to force the old dynamic back into place through sheer volume and violence." Stephanie didn't just yell, she shrieked. It was a primal, ugly sound. "I gave you life," she screamed, grabbing a ceramic vase from my entryway table, a gift I had bought for myself with my first paycheck, and hurling it at the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. "You don't get to say no to me. You don't get to have things I don't say you can have. I own you, I own this apartment, I own that money." She wasn't trying to get the loan back anymore. She was trying to destroy the evidence of my independence. If she couldn't control me, she would break me. She lunged toward me, her hands curled into claws, her eyes completely vacant of anything resembling love. Tyler grabbed her arm, stopping her inches from my face. "Don't," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Let go of me," she spat. "She's my daughter. She owes me everything. She owes you nothing," a voice said from the doorway. Stephanie froze. The air left the room. Donald stood in the open door frame, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. He hadn't just sent us home. He had followed us, anticipating exactly this kind of violence. He stepped into the apartment, looking at the shattered vase, then at my mother's wild face. "I'm calling the loan, Richard," Donald said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "And I've just handed the file regarding the falsified collateral to these officers. They're here to take a statement regarding the fraud, and now it seems they're witnessing a domestic disturbance and property damage." Richard slumped against the wall, the fight draining out of him instantly. He looked at the officers, then at Donald. He knew it wasn't just bankruptcy anymore, it was prison. Stephanie looked from Donald to me. The burst was over. The energy was gone, leaving only a hollow, pathetic shell. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just looked at me with a confusion that was almost tragic. She genuinely couldn't understand a world where I didn't save her. "Isabella," she whispered. "Zweir. Your parents." I looked at the shards of the vase on the floor. I looked at the woman who had slapped me, robbed me, and tried to sell my future to pay for her golden child's mistakes. "No," I said, "you're just people who broke into my house." I walked to the door and held it wide open. "Get out." They didn't argue. They walked out past the police, heads down, into a future they had bought and paid for. I shut the door, locked the deadbolt, and for the first time in my life, the silence inside didn't feel lonely. It felt safe. The fallout was swift and absolute. Within 30 days, my parents' business was seized. Their house, the one they had mortgaged to the hilt to fund Sierra's lifestyle, went into foreclosure. The district attorney picked up the fraud case, and while they avoided significant prison time by taking a plea deal, they were left with nothing. No reputation, no assets, no friends. Sierra, stripped of her funding and her safety net, was forced to move into a small apartment with 3 roommates and take a job in retail. The last I heard, she was still posting vague, victimized quotes on social media, but her audience had moved on. Without the props of wealth, her influencer career evaporated like mist. As for me, I didn't stay in that apartment. It had too many ghosts. Tyler and I took the $54,000, still safe, still mine, and used it exactly as I had planned. We put a down payment on a small house with a garden, far away from the city, far away from the yacht club, and far away from the people who shared my DNA. We didn't have a big wedding. We eloped to the coast, just the 2 of us and 2 witnesses. Donald sent a bottle of champagne, but he didn't come. He understood that we needed to start our marriage with a clean slate without the weight of the past. Sometimes I sit in my garden and think about the slap. It used to make me angry. Now it just makes me grateful. That slap was the moment the truth became undeniable. It was the moment I stopped being a daughter and started being a person. It cost me my family to keep my soul. But looking around at the life I've built, a life that is quiet, solvent, and authentically mine, I know I got the better end of the deal. I have zero balance with them now, and that is the richest feeling in the world. If you enjoyed the story, hit like and subscribe for more story, share this story. You are not alone, God bless you, thanks for watching.